Act like you love me, please. The poor girl begged the CEO millionaire in front of her ex. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain had just stopped when Mira walked into the small downtown cafe, clutching a damp envelope against her chest. Her hair stuck to her cheeks, her shoes squeaked with every step, and her heart felt heavier than the sky outside. She was supposed to drop off her resume for a part-time shift, but fate had other plans. At the far end of the room, a group of people laughed loudly. Mira froze. Among them sat her ex-boyfriend, Ryan. The man who had once promised her forever, and then left when she lost her job and her father fell ill. Now, he was dressed in an expensive suit, sitting beside a woman whose diamond ring caught every light in the room. Her chest tightened. Ryan looked up, saw her, and smirked a look filled with pity and cruel satisfaction. Mira wanted to vanish, but her legs refused to move. Then beside her a low voice said, "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" She turned. The man standing there looked like he had stepped out of a magazine. Tall, sharp-featured, wearing a black tailored suit that contrasted with his calm gray eyes. He held a cup of black coffee in one hand and looked at her with quiet curiosity. Mira swallowed hard, panic rising. Ryan was watching. The humiliation burned through her chest. Her voice trembled. "Please," she whispered, "act like you love me." Just for a moment. The stranger raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because he is my ex," she said quickly, "and I cannot let him see me fall apart." The man studied her face for a long second. Then he pulled out the chair and sat down beside her. His tone was smooth, steady. "All right," he said, "but you owe me an explanation later." Mira nodded, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear herself think. The man leaned closer, resting his arm on the back of her chair. "Smile," he whispered. "He is still looking." She forced a smile, trembling, but the warmth in the man's voice steadied her. For a brief moment, the cafe seemed to fade away the laughter, the whispers, the pitying looks. It was just the two of them. Ryan's smirk faltered. He looked confused, almost jealous. The stranger's hand brushed lightly against Mira's shoulder, his voice low but clear. "Do you trust me?" Mira blinked, startled by the question. But before she could answer, he reached for her hand and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You always forget your umbrella, darling." Ryan's fiancée froze mid-laugh. The cafe fell silent. Mira stared at the stranger, her breath caught in her throat. And just like that, one desperate lie had begun a story neither of them could walk away from. The next morning, the city was wrapped in pale light. Mira walked fast down the cracked sidewalk, her apron stuffed in her bag, trying to ignore the ache that had settled in her chest after last night. She had not even asked for the stranger's name. The whole thing felt unreal, like a dream she had borrowed from someone braver. When she reached the small cafe, the manager called out from behind the counter, "Mira, you have a visitor." She frowned, confused. No one ever came to see her. Standing near the window was the man from yesterday. The same sharp gray eyes, the same calm authority. Today, he was dressed more casually, a dark jacket over a white shirt, but the aura of control never left him. He looked up and smiled faintly. "You left this." He held out a folded napkin. Inside was her resume, slightly damp from the rain. Her face flushed. "I did not think I would ever see you again," she said quietly. "I said you owed me an explanation," he replied. His voice was even, almost teasing, but his gaze carried weight. Mira hesitated. "About yesterday." "I panicked. I did not mean to involve you." He nodded once. "You were desperate, I understand." He paused, studying her face. "But I also came for another reason. I have a proposal." Her hands tensed on the counter. "A proposal?" He set a sleek black card in front of her. Ethan Cole, Cole Group. The name hit her like a small shock. She had seen that name on billboards, in news headlines, attached to skyscrapers that touched the clouds. A man like him did not belong in her world. "I am attending several public events this month," he continued. "My family expects me to bring a companion, someone believable." "You were convincing last night." Mira's mouth opened, but no words came out. "You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" "For 3 events," Ethan said simply. "In exchange, you will be compensated fairly. Enough to pay for your father's medication and rent for a few months." The air felt thick. She could almost hear her father coughing in the small apartment they shared, could almost see the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen table. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Because you are real," he said, "and people see that." For a long moment, she stared at the card. Every rational part of her screamed that this was insane. But the thought of going home empty-handed, of watching her father's condition worsen, crushed her hesitation. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I will do it." Ethan's lips curved slightly. "Good. We will start tomorrow. I will send a driver to pick you up." As he left the café, Mira sank onto the nearest chair, her pulse racing. The world outside seemed to blur the street sounds, the chatter, the rain beginning again against the windows. When she returned home that evening, her father was sitting in his armchair, a blanket wrapped around his thin shoulders. "You look different," he said with a weak smile. "Something good happened today?" She hesitated, then smiled back. "Maybe. I got a new job." He chuckled softly. "Hold on to that hope, sweetheart. Sometimes one small chance can change everything." That night, Mira could not sleep. She kept replaying Ethan's words, "You are real, and people see that." They echoed between the ticking of the clock and the whisper of the rain. Somewhere in the glittering city skyline, Ethan Cole stared out from his penthouse window, the faint reflection of her in his mind. He was not sure why he had offered that proposal, only that the moment she looked up at him in that café, something inside him shifted. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, the city lights flickering like restless stars below. 3 events, he murmured to himself. That should be simple enough. But deep down, even he knew nothing about this would stay simple for long. The following afternoon, a black car waited outside the narrow apartment building. Mira stood at the window, clutching her small purse, her heart hammering in her chest. Her father was resting in the next room, unaware that his daughter was about to step into a world that did not belong to her. The driver, polite and expressionless, opened the rear door. "Miss Mira, Mr. Cole is expecting you." She nodded and slid inside. The leather smelled expensive, the silence thick. When the car stopped in front of the Cole Group headquarters, she froze for a second. The building towered above the street like a monument of glass and power. Inside, the marble floor reflected her nervous footsteps. Ethan was waiting in a private conference room. He was dressed in a navy suit, his tie perfectly straight. On the table lay a folder and a pen. "Sit," he said, motioning to the chair opposite him. "Before we begin, I need you to read this." Mira opened the folder. Inside was a contract, pages of neat clauses and signatures. Her hands trembled slightly as she read. "No romantic involvement," she murmured under her breath. "No interference in personal affairs. Appear together at 3 public events. Maintain confidentiality at all times." When she looked up, Ethan's eyes met hers. "Do you have any objections?" Mira shook her head slowly. "No, but this feels very official." "It has to be," he replied. "I do not take chances." She signed her name carefully at the bottom of the page. Ethan took the document, slid it into the folder, and leaned back. "Good. We will begin with the charity dinner tomorrow night. You will meet with my stylist in the morning." Mira hesitated. "I have never been to a place like that." "Oh, that is why you will have help," he said, his tone softening. "You only need to be yourself. Just remember, people in my circle can be sharp." The next morning, she found herself standing in front of a mirror in a high-end boutique. The stylist, a lively woman named Clara, circled her like a whirlwind of fabric and pins. "You have beautiful shoulders," Clara said brightly. "This gown will do wonders." Mira barely recognized the reflection staring back at her. The soft blue dress shimmered under the lights. Her hair was pinned up, her makeup subtle but elegant. For a fleeting moment, She felt like someone who belonged. That evening, when the car arrived to take her to the event, Ethan was already inside. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You clean up well." "Thank you," she said quietly. The charity dinner was held at a grand ballroom filled with chandeliers and laughter that sounded rehearsed. As they entered, every head turned. Ethan placed a hand lightly at the small of her back, guiding her forward. "Smile," he whispered. She did. Cameras flashed. People murmured. Someone whispered, "Is that Ethan Cole's new girlfriend?" Mira's pulse quickened. She followed Ethan through the crowd, answering polite questions, pretending to be calm. At their table, she spotted Ryan, her ex-boyfriend, seated only a few rows away with his wealthy fiancée. His expression froze when he saw her. Ethan noticed. "That is him, isn't it?" he asked softly. Mira nodded without looking. "Yes." Ethan's gaze hardened. He leaned closer, his voice low. "Then let him see what he lost." When the host called Ethan to the stage to present a donation, Mira watched as he spoke with effortless confidence, commanding every eye in the room. When he returned to their table, she found herself smiling. "You really are good at this," she said. "I told you," he replied, pouring her a glass of sparkling water. "Just follow my lead." As the evening drew to an end, Mira excused herself to the terrace. The air outside was cool and quiet, a relief after the noise inside. She leaned against the railing, gazing at the city lights below. A moment later, Ethan joined her. "You handled yourself well," he said. "I was terrified," she admitted. "But thank you for helping me." "Oh." He looked at her, the city's reflection flickering in his gray eyes. "You did not need my help, Mira. You just needed to believe you could belong here." She turned toward him, her breath catching slightly. For the first time, the distance between their worlds seemed smaller. "3 events," she said softly. "I think I can handle that." Ethan smiled faintly. "We will see." They stood in silence for a moment as the wind moved through the terrace. Below them, the city pulsed with light, unaware that in the middle of all its noise, a quiet story had just begun to shift towards something neither of them had planned. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and appearances. Mira followed Ethan through a world she had only seen in magazines, boardrooms, charity luncheons, and private events filled with people who smiled with perfect teeth and spoke in careful tones. She learned how to walk in heels without stumbling, how to hold a champagne glass without trembling, and how to smile without giving away her fear. Each morning began the same way. A car arrived to take her to Ethan's office, where his assistant briefed her on schedules and etiquette. Ethan was often buried in meetings, but he always took a moment to check on her progress. "Remember," he said one afternoon while reviewing a list of upcoming appearances, "people notice more than you think. Every word, every gesture, it matters." Mira nodded, scribbling notes. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" Ethan paused, his pen hovering above the page. "All the time," he said quietly, "but it is part of the game." By the time the second event arrived, a corporate gala held at a riverside hotel, Mira had begun to move more comfortably beside him. The ballroom shimmered with crystal lights, music from a live band floating through the air. As they entered, Ethan's hand brushed lightly against hers, steadying her. "You look perfect," he said. "Perfect is not the same as comfortable," she replied, half smiling. He chuckled softly. "Then let us call it progress." They made their way through a crowd of executives and shareholders. Mira recognized a few faces from business magazines, but most looked at her with polite curiosity. She could feel their questions, their silent judgments. Still, she kept her posture straight, and her smile gentle. Midway through the evening, an older woman approached them. "Ethan, darling," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "You never told us you were seeing someone." "This is Mira," Ethan introduced calmly. "She has been helping me with a few public projects." The woman's smile sharpened. "Oh, how lovely. And where did you two meet?" Mira's pulse raced. Before she could stumble over an answer, Ethan replied smoothly. "At a café downtown. She was kind enough to lend me her time when I needed it most." Something in his tone made Mira glance at him. There was a truth hiding inside that lie. Later that night, when the crowd had thinned, they stepped onto the balcony to breathe. The city spread out below them, lights shimmering on the river. Mira's heels clicked softly against the stone. "You are doing well," Ethan said, leaning against the railing. I keep waiting for someone to realize I do not belong here, she confessed. He turned toward her. You belong anywhere you choose to stand. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. His words settled deep in her chest, a warmth she had not expected. For a brief moment, she forgot the contract, the pretense, the distance between them. She only saw the man behind the tailored suit, the one who looked at her as if he had forgotten how to be lonely. When they returned inside, a photographer called for a picture. Ethan placed a steady hand at her waist, and for a heartbeat, she did not have to pretend. The camera flash caught something real, the smallest flicker of connection in their eyes. That night, as the car drove her home, Mira leaned her head against the window, watching the city lights blur past. She realized she was smiling without meaning to. Somewhere between the lies and the truth, something in her heart had begun to shift. The morning sun spilled through the apartment window, painting the worn floor with pale gold. Mira stood in front of the mirror, tying her hair into a loose bun. It had been 2 weeks since she first signed Ethan's contract, and she could barely recognize the woman staring back at her. The nerves that once shook her hands had turned into quiet determination. She had learned to stand tall, to speak with calmness even when her heart raced. That evening marked the third and final event in their arrangement, a formal business dinner hosted by the Cole Group Board of Directors. Ethan's assistant had told her it would be an important night, filled with potential investors, reporters, and family members. Mira tried to convince herself that it was just another performance, but something inside her whispered that it was more than that. When the car arrived, Ethan was already waiting. He looked different that night. No tie, no stiffness, just quiet focus. You look ready, he said when she stepped in. I have had practice, she replied. Her voice steady, though her fingers fidgeted with her clutch. Ethan smiled faintly. Then let us make tonight simple. We smile, we endure the questions, and we leave when I say so. The dinner was held at a grand hotel overlooking the city skyline. Chandeliers glimmered above tables dressed in silver and white. As they entered, conversations paused. Mira could feel the weight of every gaze. Ethan guided her through the crowd with the same subtle confidence she had grown used to. Halfway through the night, while Ethan spoke with an investor, Mira excused herself to find a moment of quiet. She stepped out onto the terrace, breathing in the cool evening air. The river below shimmered with reflected light. She was lost in thought when a familiar voice cut through the noise behind her. Mira? Her heart sank. Ryan was standing a few steps away, holding a glass of wine, his expression a mixture of surprise and mockery. So it is true, he said. You really are with him. Ethan Cole, the man who could buy a city block without blinking. Mira crossed her arms. What do you want, Ryan? He smirked. I just wanted to see how far you were willing to go. Pretending to belong, dressing like them. Tell me, does he know you are just a waitress? Before she could respond, Ethan appeared at her side, calm but sharp-eyed. Yes, he said evenly. I know exactly who she is. Ryan stiffened, caught off guard. Ethan stepped forward slightly, his presence cutting through the air. And for the record, he continued, what she is does not diminish her worth. You left her because you could not see past your own pride. I will not make the same mistake. Ryan's jaw tightened. He muttered something under his breath and walked away. Mira stood frozen, her throat tight. Ethan turned to her. Are you all right? She nodded slowly, blinking back tears. You did not have to defend me. I wanted to, he said simply. He had no right to talk to you that way. When they returned inside, the atmosphere had changed. People were whispering, their eyes following them. Mira felt a tremor of unease. At their table, one of the board members leaned toward Ethan. Mr. Cole, there are rumors circulating. Someone leaked details about your arrangement. Ethan's expression hardened. What kind of rumors? That your relationship is contractual, the man said quietly. That she is being paid to accompany you. Mira felt the blood drain from her face. Ethan's jaw tightened. That is not their business, he said sharply. But he could already see reporters stirring near the entrance, their cameras flashing. Within minutes, the whispers turned into a storm. Someone had fed the press exactly what they wanted, a scandal. Security tried to hold back the crowd, but the damage was done. Ethan took Mira's hand and led her out through a side corridor, ignoring the questions shouted after them. Outside, under the awning, rain began to fall. She turned to him, her voice trembling. "They will ruin you." He shook his head. "They will try." "And me?" she whispered. "What about me?" Ethan's gaze softened. "You will be fine. I will handle this." "Oh." But in her heart, Mira knew things were no longer simple. The line between truth and pretense had shattered. She was no longer just the girl he hired to play a role. When the car arrived at her building, she hesitated before getting out. "Ethan," she said quietly, "maybe this is where we end it. You do not owe me anything." He looked at her for a long moment. "You are wrong," he said. "I owe you honesty." Then, before she could reply, he closed the door and drove away, leaving her standing in the rain. Mira stayed there for a moment, the sound of the city muffled by the downpour. Somewhere between the thunder and her heartbeat, she realized she was no longer afraid of being seen for who she truly was. But she also knew that the truth, whatever it was, would come with a price neither of them had yet paid. Rain fell through the night, steady and cold. By morning, the story had spread across every major business outlet. Headlines questioned Ethan Cole's integrity, calling Mira the mystery woman with a price tag. Her phone filled with messages, some cruel, some curious, but she could not bear to read them. She stayed inside her small apartment, curtains drawn, holding her father's hand as he slept. Ethan, miles away in his glass-walled office, stood before the window, his reflection divided between power and guilt. His assistant's voice broke the silence. "The board wants an immediate statement. They think distancing yourself from her is the only option." He did not turn around. "And what do you think?" "I think the truth will matter more in the long run," she said quietly. Ethan dismissed the meeting requests piling up on his desk. He needed to think, but every thought led back to the moment on the terrace, to the way Mira had looked at him, not as a millionaire, but as a man. That afternoon, he found himself driving toward the old neighborhood where she lived. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening. When she opened the door, surprise flickered across her face. "What are you doing here?" she asked softly. "I needed to see you," he said, "to tell you that I am sorry. This is my fault. I should have protected you." Mira shook her head. "It was not your fault. You warned me that your world was sharp. I just did not realize how sharp until now." "Oh." He looked past her to where her father slept. "You should not have to pay for my mistakes," he said. "But I will make this right." "How?" she whispered. "By ending the contract?" Ethan hesitated, his voice low but certain. "By ending the lie." Mira met his gaze, her heartbeat quick and uneven. "And what does that mean?" "It means," he said slowly, "I am done pretending." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the clouds began to break apart, a faint line of sunlight cutting through the gray. Ethan stepped back toward the doorway. "Whatever happens next, I want you to know I meant every word I said that night. You do belong, Mira. Not because of me, but because of who you are." When he left, the apartment felt strangely still. Mira closed her eyes and let the silence fill the space where fear used to live. For the first time since that rainy afternoon in the café, she was not afraid of what would come next. The next morning, the world seemed louder. News vans lined the streets outside Cole Group headquarters, and flashes from cameras lit up the glass lobby like lightning. Ethan walked through the chaos without a word, his security team clearing a path. Inside the boardroom, every seat was filled. The directors looked tense, their voices sharp with accusation. "Your actions have endangered this company's reputation," one of them said. "Our shareholders are demanding answers." Ethan sat at the head of the table, hands folded. "I will give them one," he replied. Another voice cut in. "The simplest solution is to release a statement. Deny everything. Say the girl was part of a marketing project. Distance yourself before this ruins you." He met their eyes one by one. "I am not denying anything. Her name is Mira. She worked in a cafe downtown. She showed me what honesty looks like in a world that has forgotten it. If this ruins me, so be it." The room fell silent. Someone muttered about resignation and liability, but Ethan stood up before they could continue. "You can replace a title," he said. "You cannot replace a conscience." Then he walked out, leaving the stunned board behind. Meanwhile, across town, Mira tried to keep her life small. She returned to her job at the cafe, ignoring the curious stares of customers. Her father's health had improved slightly, and she told herself that was enough. But the ache in her chest, did not fade. Each time she saw Ethan's face on television, each headline questioning his choices, she felt the weight of their story pressing down. That evening, while closing up the cafe, she noticed a folded newspaper left on a table. The headline read, "Ethan Cole defies board, refuses to deny relationship." She traced the words with her fingers, her heart trembling. Her coworker, a kind older woman named Ruth, approached quietly. "That man of yours has courage," she said. "You do not see that often." Mira managed a small smile. "He is not mine." Ruth tilted her head. "Maybe not yet." Later that night, Mira stood on the apartment balcony, watching the city below. The rain had returned, soft and steady. She thought about the way Ethan had looked at her the last time they spoke, like he had already made a choice. Across the city, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse, a half-empty glass of water beside him. The phone on his desk rang non-stop reporters, lawyers, partners, but he ignored them all. His company might crumble, but for the first time in years, he felt free of pretending. Then came the knock at the door. His assistant entered, holding a folder. "They are moving to suspend your position until the investigation ends," she said quietly. "They will announce it tomorrow." Ethan nodded. "Let them." As the door closed, he looked out over the skyline, the rain streaking down the glass. He whispered to himself, "At least now the truth is clean." The next morning, Mira saw the headline online. "Ethan Cole steps down as CEO, amid scandal." Her chest tightened. The world had turned its back on him, yet she knew he had done it for the right reason. Her father looked up from the couch. "You should go to him," he said softly. "A man who risks everything for the truth does not come around twice." "Oh." Mira hesitated, her eyes filling. "What if he does not want to see me?" "Then you will know," her father replied. "But you will not spend your life wondering." She nodded slowly. The rain continued outside, blurring the city lights into soft gold. Somewhere in that vast maze of glass and thunder, the man who once pretended to love her had chosen to tell the world he really did. The sky was gray when Mira stepped out of the subway and walked toward the downtown hotel, where the Cole Group press conference was about to begin. Her hands trembled inside her coat pockets. The streets buzzed with reporters, cameras, and voices shouting questions that tangled in the air like static. She did not know what she expected to find, only that her heart told her she had to be there. Inside the ballroom, dozens of journalists waited behind velvet ropes. Bright lights shone against the stage where a single microphone stood beside a company banner. At exactly 11 o'clock, Ethan walked in. The noise quieted instantly. He looked calm, dressed in a simple black suit. No tie, no corporate armor, just a man ready to tell the truth. Mira slipped into the back of the room. No one noticed her among the crowd. Ethan faced the cameras. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice steady. "I know there have been questions about my recent actions and my personal life. I will answer them all right now." A murmur ran through the crowd. He continued, "Yes, I entered into a formal agreement with Mira Lewis, but that agreement stopped meaning anything the moment I realized she was the only honest thing in my world. She is not a scandal. She is the reason I remembered who I am." The room went silent. Cameras clicked softly. Ethan's gaze swept across the crowd, and for a second, it landed on Mira. His voice grew quieter. "People talk about wealth as if it gives value, but value comes from integrity. And tonight, I am walking away from everything built on the opposite of that." He stepped away from the podium. Questions erupted, but he ignored them, heading toward the exit. The moment he disappeared through the side door, the room burst into chaos. Mira followed. She found him in the hallway near the service elevator, his shoulders tense, his expression unreadable. "You should not be here," he said softly. "Then why do I feel like I am exactly where I should be?" she replied. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You saw what I did. The board will strip everything away. They already started." "I know," she said, "and you did it anyway." "I could not let them keep lying," he said. "Not about you. Not about what this became." "Oh." Mira stepped closer. "You said once that pretending was part of the game. Maybe this is what happens when someone finally stops playing." He looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, the walls around him dropped. "You should hate me for dragging you into this." "I do not," she whispered. "I think you did what was right." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside the window was a blur of rain and neon. Then Ethan reached into his pocket and unfolded the napkin she had given him on that first day at the café, the one with her resume still faintly stained by water. "I kept it," he said quietly. "It reminded me that sometimes the smallest things have the most truth." Mira felt tears sting her eyes. "You are free now," she said. He shook his head. "No, not yet." Before she could respond, a staff member appeared, telling Ethan the press was waiting for another statement. He nodded but did not move. His eyes stayed on Mira. "Go home for now," he said softly. "Let the noise die down. I will find you when this is over." She hesitated, then nodded. As she turned to leave, Ethan called after her. "Mira." She looked back. "Thank you," he said, "for being real when I was not." Mira walked out into the rain, her heart full and aching all at once. Behind her, the echoes of cameras and questions faded into the hum of the city. For the first time, she did not care what the world believed. The truth was finally enough. 1 year later, the city looked different. The skyline glowed warmer in the late spring sun, and the sharp edges of winter had softened into something gentler. In a quiet corner downtown, a small café reopened after renovation. The sign above the door read, "The Open Cup." Inside, Mira wiped down the counter, humming softly. The air smelled of roasted beans and vanilla. A lot had changed since that day she begged a stranger to pretend to love her. Her father's health had improved. The medical bills were finally paid. She managed to save enough to buy half ownership of the café where it all began. Every morning she arrived before sunrise, unlocking the door, arranging flowers, and greeting regulars by name. It was simple, but it was real. Still, there were days she caught herself glancing at the door whenever it chimed, hoping, and then scolding herself for hoping. After Ethan's press conference, she had not seen him again. The media storm raged for months. He resigned officially from the coal group, then vanished from public sight. Some said he left the country. Others claimed he started a foundation under a different name. Mira never tried to find out. She told herself that if he wanted to be found, he would appear. That morning, as she arranged pastries in the display case, Ruth walked in, carrying a small newspaper. "Look at this," she said, laying it on the counter. "A feature on independent community projects. There is a man funding food programs across the city. It says he used to run one of the biggest real estate firms in the state." Mira's hands stilled. The article mentioned a name she knew by heart, Ethan Cole. Her chest tightened, a mix of joy and disbelief. "He is back?" Ruth smiled. "Seems so. There is a grand reopening event for his foundation tonight. You should go." "I do not think he would want to see me," Mira said softly. Ruth shook her head. "Then let him tell you that himself." That evening, Mira stood outside the event hall, heart pounding. The building was smaller than the skyscrapers Ethan once owned, but it radiated warmth. The sign read, "The Cole Foundation for Community Growth." Inside, photographs lined the walls, families, students, volunteers. In the center stood Ethan, talking with a group of donors. He looked the same and yet entirely different. The sharpness had left his face. In its place was calm certainty. When he turned and saw her, the noise of the room faded. He excused himself and walked toward her. For a moment, neither spoke. "You came," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I read about what you are doing," she replied. "You kept your promise." He smiled. "I told you I would find you when the noise was gone." Mira looked around the bright room filled with laughter and light. "It is quieter now," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "Quieter, but fuller." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wooden frame. Inside, behind glass, was the same folded napkin she had given him long ago. The one that had started everything. "I thought this was lost," she whispered. "I kept it," Ethan said. "It reminded me where honesty began." Lar. For a long moment, they simply stood there, two people shaped by everything they had survived. Then Ethan spoke again. "There is something else." He took a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, no diamonds, only a silver band, etched with the words, "Real." begins here. Mira's breath caught. Ethan, he smiled gently. The first time we met, you asked me to pretend. I did. And somehow, it became the truest thing I have ever known. So this time, I am asking you no pretending. Be real with me. Her eyes filled with tears. Around them, the guests faded into soft blur. You sure you want the girl from the café? She whispered. I am sure, he said, because she is the one who taught me what love costs and what it is worth. Mira laughed through her tears. Then yes, she said, I will. He slipped the ring on her finger. Applause rippled quietly from those who had been watching, but the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. Later that night, as they stood outside under the city lights, Ethan wrapped his coat around her shoulders the same way he once had in another rain-soaked night. Do you remember that day? He asked. How could I forget? She replied, smiling. It all began with one act, one lie, and 1,000 truths waiting behind it. He looked down at her, his voice low. Act like you love me? Mira shook her head, smiling wider. No, she said. I do not have to act anymore. The wind carried their laughter down the quiet street. Above them, the city lights shimmered like blessings. And for the first time, their story was not a performance, it was home.